Rishi Sunak's Rwanda bill is about to pass Parliament finally. And it's a really big moment in British politics. Both for policy, we're finally going to see whether the government is correct, and this deportation scheme will really decrease the small boat crossings across the English Channel. But also for politics, there are very few hard dividing lines between Labour and the Tories at this election. Rwanda is one of them. Labour sees it as a gimmick and has promised to scrap the scheme. The Tories see it as absolutely essential to tackling illegal migration. First things first, it's probably worth stepping back and thinking actually why we have a Rwanda deportation flight scheme at all. It's all about small boats, that is the number of boats crossing the English Channel, carrying migrants and bringing them to the shores of the UK illegally. That's actually a relatively recent phenomenon. If you go back 5 years, 2019, there were almost no migrants coming to the UK this way. The next year, 2020, it was about 10,000. 2021, it was about up to 30,000. 2022 was the record year, that was around 45,000. Then last year, 2023, it was back down to around 30,000. So this isn't something that's been happening for decades and decades. Possibly that spike was to do with the fact that Britain is outside the EU now, so it's trickier to get here legally. There's also been success stopping people coming in vans and lorries through the Channel Tunnel. So all of that has created this spike in people coming across the channel in boats. Since that phenomenon emerged, the Tories have tried different things to reduce the numbers. They've tried to become more efficient at dealing with asylum applications when people get here. They've spent a lot of time and money with the French trying to improve coastal patrols on the French side to stop boats launching. But ultimately Boris Johnson wanted an extra element, what became known as the Rwanda deportation scheme. The idea is quite a simple one. Anybody who arrives on a boat will be deported to a third country, in this case Rwanda, where they'll have their claim for asylum dealt with there. And if they're successful, they will actually stay in Rwanda rather than coming to the UK. When the policy was announced, it was undeniably controversial.
The tragedy is, we know the Prime Minister doesn't even believe in the Rwanda gimmick. He tried to stop funding it.
Some critics in the Tory party questioned whether it was inhumane. Church of England leaders essentially argued it was immoral. And a chunk of the electorate still seems to think that if genuine asylum seekers come here by whatever means, they should be handled here and not in an African country.
Refugees are there for a reason. The reasons being wars, environmental disasters and human rights abuses.
Since the Tories decided on the Rwanda plan, there has been an almighty 2-year political battle. It began in April 2022 when Boris Johnson, then Prime Minister, unveiled the scheme. Scroll forward a few months to June 2022, and the flight was about to take off, only for judges in Strasbourg at the European Court of Human Rights to intervene, grounding the flight. That autumn, October 2022, Rishi Sunak came in. He had reportedly been hesitating about whether to support the Rwanda plan, but he ended up fully endorsing it and promising to push ahead as Prime Minister. Slowly, the scheme was working its way through the courts until November 2023, when the Supreme Court delivered a huge blow to Mr. Sunak. They said the scheme was unlawful, essentially saying it couldn't be guaranteed that Rwanda was a safe country. That's when the latest scramble in Parliament began. Rishi Sunak announced what he said was an emergency piece of legislation, which unilaterally declared that Rwanda was a safe country.
I'm also announcing today that we will take the extraordinary step of introducing emergency legislation. This will enable Parliament to confirm that with our new treaty, Rwanda is safe.
At the same time, his ministers signed a treaty with Rwanda, toughening up the protections for people who have moved there. That has been working its way through Parliament for months, with the House of Lords trying to push changes into the bill and MPs overturning them.
Order!
And now the government could finally look forward to putting on flights and getting deportations going.
I am absolutely determined to get the legislation through the House to break the business model of these criminal smuggling gangs, to deter people making those dangerous crossings across the channel, to protect our borders and to stop the boats.
One of the key questions as to whether this policy is going to work is what happens with the courts. And there are two big areas here. First one is whether any challenges will successfully be brought to the policy. The government has tried extremely hard to minimise any legal possibility of that happening. They've tried to block any systematic challenges legally to the bill by essentially saying we are declaring Rwanda is a safe country and that is now settled in law. Where they might have more problems is on individual challenges. Ministers have tried to define really tightly who can bring these challenges. You've got to show somehow that you would face severe harm by being deported to Rwanda. But critics of the bill, for example Robert Jenrick, the former immigration minister, have said that it's still too wide and that there will be many successful challenges that could see cases running through the courts for months.
The ayes to the right, 68. The noes to the left, 529.
And then, secondly, you have the question of those Strasbourg judges, the European Court of Human Rights. The last time flights were grounded, it was because they intervened through what's known as pyjama injunctions. The Prime Minister has been signalling that if Strasbourg judges do that again, he is willing to ignore them and push ahead anyway. Would he really do that? There's been reporting that his Attorney General, Victoria Prentice, has actually told him that could break international law.
I've been very clear, I won't let a foreign court stop us from getting flights up and running and establishing that deterrent.
That could be a major call my bluff moment. Will the Prime Minister stand up to foreign courts as he's vowed to? Or would he ultimately acquiesce if the ECHR stepped in? And then, of course, in election year, there is the politics. The Tories think the small boats issue can help them skewer Labour and get into a position where the voters are on their side, not Labour's. It's not hard to understand why. Whenever you look at polls breaking down who does better on particular issues, the area the Tories tend to do strongest against Labour is on immigration. Traditionally, they're seen as the party of tough borders, and so hope to get electoral gain from that. So let's say, for argument's sake, that the policy does appear to be working. Flights have got off, they haven't been legally quashed, and by the autumn, a dozen flights or more have gone to Rwanda. Is that a good thing for the Tories? Well, they believe it is, because they can argue, look, here is a policy that is working, that is having an impact, and that the opposition party would scrap the minute they got into office.
I would roll up my sleeves and tackle this in an effective way, not a gimmick.
The problem is that politics is more complicated than that. And I think there are two big reasons why it might not have as big an effect as the Tories are hoping. The problem is it's not just Labour figures who are criticising the policy, it's actually people on the right of the Conservative Party. Suella Braverman, the former Home Secretary, Robert Jenrick, the former Immigration Minister, scores of other Tory MPs on the right, Liz Truss, even figures like Nigel Farage outside the party. They are saying that the bill does not go far enough, that the Rwanda plan does not go far enough, that Rishi Sunak should be tougher to try and tackle this small boats issue. So he's got incoming not just from his Labour opponents on the left, but his critics on the right too. And finally, there's the issue of polling. When you dig into it, yes, on the face of it, it appears more people support the Rwanda plan than oppose it. But actually, when you ask this question, do you think it will work? Do you think it will reduce the number of small boats, the reason this entire plan is in place? Just a quarter of the voters say yes. Even if the flights do get up and running, the numbers will probably be relatively small. It may prove too little, too late for Rishi for convincing the public that his plan will ultimately bring down the small boat crossings. Westminster Source is a Telegraph series taking you behind the scenes of British politics. If you want live news and analysis about politics, please do check our Telegraph website and app. And if there's a topic you think we should be covering, put it in a comment below.